Welcome back to another exciting episode of Investments. Hola, mi amigos y amigas. That is Spanish for hello, my friends, male friends, female friends. Abre tus ojos soñolientos. Open your sleepy eyes and get ready to absorb some wonderful investments information from Dr. E. Okay, here we go. Let's move on to the expected rate of return. So we're going to do slides 60 through 65. We're going to finish up chapter 1. Then we'll move into chapter 2. Once we finish chapter 2, I've written a brand new test for you. You're welcome. Okay, brand new multiple choice test that only covers 2 chapters. Why? Because the students have been telling me that 3 chapters is too many chapters for the most part. Sometimes it's not, but in the case of chapters 1 and 2, the students said, hey, there's too much information, Dr. E. Would you be willing to cut back the information on the first test? And I said, yes, because I am here for you. I am here to serve you. I am here to teach you. I am here to make you an investments genius. And Dr. E listens to his students, okay? And that's just one, oh, where are my sunglasses? That's just one more thing about Dr. E that makes him the coolest professor in the universe. Okay, so slides 60 through 65. All right, so the expected rate of return. All right, it is a point estimate, which means it's one number. It's an estimate of the most likely return from an investment. It is an estimate. It is our best guess. All right? And so what we do, theoretically, is we establish various possible returns. Then we assign a probability for each possible return. Then we multiply the probability for each return by that return. Then we sum them up, and we come up with our expected rate of return. So let's do an example. Again, easy math. All right, there's a 30% chance the economy will be strong, and there is a relationship between the economy and security prices. Okay? If it is, the economy is strong, then Hewlett-Packard stock will rise 25%. That's our estimate. So we're tying the return of the stock to economic growth. There's a 50% chance the economy will be average, not strong, but average. If so, Hewlett-Packard will rise 10%. Okay? Slower economy, lower stock return. There's a 20% probability the economy will be weak. So we have 30%, 30%, 50% is 80%, and 20% is 100%. So those are our 3 scenarios about the economy. And if the economy is weak, Hewlett-Packard stock will decline 7%. So we're saying that there's a 30% chance Hewlett-Packard stock will go up 25%, 50% chance it'll go up by 10%, and 20% chance it will go down by 7%. What is our expected return for Hewlett-Packard? So let's multiply the 30% times the 25%, that times that. Let's add in the 50% times the 10%, and let's add in the 20% times the minus 7%. Do the multiplication, do the addition, and we get an 11.1% expected rate of return. Will that return happen? And will it be high enough? The 11% is at our required rate of return. That's our expected rate of return. All right. Now let's look at the weighted average return. So we can determine the return of a portfolio, the expected return, without knowing the beginning or ending dollar values of the portfolio. Remember, we looked at holding period return. Well, there's another way that we can find the return for a portfolio. Okay. What we need to know are what percentage of the portfolio is represented by each security at the beginning of the period. Okay. So how much did we have in Hewlett Packard stock? If the portfolio had $1 million and we had $100,000 in Hewlett Packard stock, how much of the portfolio was in Hewlett Packard stock? And the answer would be 100,000 divided by $1 million. You guessed it, 10%. At the beginning of the period. Now let's say the Hewlett Packard stock goes up by 10%. Okay, so we have 100,000, now we have 110,000. And let's say the portfolio is still worth $1 million. That means some other stocks went down. How much is Hewlett Packard stock worth at the end of the period? And the answer is 11%. 1.1 million, 110,000 divided by 1 million. That's 11%. Why? Because Hewlett Packard stock went up and the rest of the stocks went down. Okay? But what we have to make sure of when we're doing these calculations is that we take the percentage Hewlett Packard is of the portfolio at the beginning of the period, not at the end of the period. If we take the end of the period percentage or weighting, then we would be double counting the return. We don't want to do that. All right, the return of each security for that period of time. So it would be the 10% weight times the 10% return. Okay. All right, so let's look at this portfolio, an example. A portfolio starts 50% in Google, 30% in McDonald's, 20% in ExxonMobil. So once again, 50% and 30% is 80% and 20%. So here's our portfolio. We have a portfolio that consists of 3 stocks. Okay? Google is up 25% for the year, McDonald's is up 15% of the year, and ExxonMobil is down 10% for the year. What is the return of the portfolio? Okay? Well, we can find it out. We're going to multiply the 50% in Google times the 25% return. Now that's the 50% at the beginning of the year. It's not going to be 50% at the end of the year. It's going to be larger than 50%, okay? Because Google went up by more than McDonald's, and it went up by much more than ExxonMobil. Therefore, Google will be a larger percentage of the portfolio at the end of the year than it was at the beginning of the year. But we take the 50% at the beginning of the year times the 25%, the 50% weight times the 25% return, plus the 30% weight times the 15% return, plus the 20% weight times the 10% negative return. Let's do it. So here's 50% times 25% plus 30% times 15% plus 20% times minus 10%. Here we go. Add them up. The return for the portfolio, 15%. There you go. Okay? The weighted average return of the portfolio. All right. What is performance attribution? Well, attribution, the root of attribution is attribute, a trait or a characteristic. Attribution means to what do we attribute? So how did we generate performance? So it's not often clients don't only want to know how did my portfolio do, they want to know why. Why did my portfolio perform as it did? And managers most definitely want to know why. Investment managers want to know why a portfolio performs as it does. All right. How was this performance generated? Okay. So we have to find the contribution to return, made by individual stocks. How or what did each stock in the portfolio contribute to the total return of the portfolio? Which stocks drove the performance, either up or down, good or bad? Okay? So we take the weight of a stock at the beginning of the period and multiply it by the stock's performance for that period of time. Okay? Here's an example. Portfolio has a return of 12%. Facebook was 5% of the portfolio at the beginning of the period. It was up 30% for the period. Facebook contributed 5% times 30%. Facebook alone contributed 1.5% of the 12% portfolio return. Now Facebook was 5% of the portfolio. Okay? So let's find out how much Facebook actually contributed in terms of the percentage of the portfolio. Let's get my calculator out and let's divide 1.5 divided by 12, And Facebook contributed 12.5% of the portfolio return. In other words, Facebook was 5% of the portfolio, but it contributed 12.5% of the return of the portfolio. Why is that? Because Facebook had a wonderful return, which obviously was much higher than the overall return of the portfolio. Facebook's performance was better than the performance of most of the other stocks. It might have been better than the performance of all of the other stocks in the portfolio. It was 5%, it rose 30%, it generated 1.5% of the 12% of the return, which is 12.5%. So Facebook contributed a disproportionate share of the return of the portfolio. It's good to know. Someone says, how did my portfolio do this year? You were up 12%. Let me check this and make sure that we're recording. Don't want to get too far down the road. Yes, we are. Okay, so you generated a 30% return on Facebook. You had 12% of the portfolio, 12% return for the portfolio, and 1.5% or 12.5% of that came from Facebook. It's always nice to know how the performance was generated. Okay, so are we finished? We are finished with chapter 1. All right, very good. So you guys take a bit of a break, and I'm going to reload the camera, and we'll move on to chapter 2 of investments. Peace out. Shalom.